Welcome to SHOWstudio. I am not Lou Stoppard in her Halloween costume. I am Dal Chodha, and I have been invited to speak with these amazing people about the Paris Spring Summer 18 shows. So before we get into them and around some other bigger issues around what's happening in the world, because there's a lot going on right now, I would like you each to introduce yourselves. So Karinna, starting with you, please.
Sure. My name is Karinna Nobbs, and I am a freelance academic and also a digital strategist in a creative technology agency called Holishin.
I'm Susie Lau. I'm a fashion writer and blogger, and I've been blogging for over 10 years, and I write for various publications.
And I'm Pajaczkowska. I'm a senior research tutor at the Royal College of Art in Fashion and Textiles. And I'm very interested in the way in which fashion now is taking itself very seriously as an interdisciplinary sort of liminal border between wearable sensors, soft robotics, as well as garments and popular culture. So it's a very exciting time for fashion, and that's why I'm here.
I'm Anouchka Grose. I'm a writer, journalist, and Lacanian psychoanalyst.
No pressure.
This is Grace.
I'm Grace. I used to be a stylist. I'm Grace Woodward, and I'm a brand consultant and creative director, and I'm currently consultant brand director at Zandra Rhodes.
So welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. One of the big things that I think that we rarely ever get the chance to unpack and think about is where fashion fits into everything else that's going on. Quite often we talk about fashion as this form of escapism. We love these kind of big dramatic shows because it means that it's something that pops out of our Instagram feeds to kind of break us away from our quite dreary lives sometimes. We love looking at clothing that represents a kind of fashion, that represents a kind of high energy, a disco feel, something that again reminds us or actually makes us forget about what other things are going on. But I think particularly in the recent weeks or so, post Harvey Weinstein, post Me Too, and also post Me Too, which I know you spoke about as well, I think there are some really interesting questions that need to be asked about, in particular, what designers and what they are making actually say about fashion right now, but more importantly, what they say about women. Because I think we talk an awful lot within fashion and in the panels as well about this idea of ungender, non-gender, kind of the mixing of the genders. But what we don't really ever talk about is kind of something like femininity and masculinity and what it does mean to actually be identify as and be a woman right now, because a lot of the clothes that are being presented to us do send us some really mixed messages. So in particular, I was wondering what you all feel, or let's start with you, Grace, as you spoke about Me Too as well. How do you feel that relates to this business of fashion?
As long as we're not going to review Donna Karan, I think we're in safe territory here. In a way, they're not related, but in a way they are. The disciplines and the industries that I've worked in, which have been across fashion photography, across entertainment, across Hollywood, whereas the Harvey Weinstein thing, I think, feels a long way away from maybe what we do. I think the kind of boundaries that get crossed in fashion photography and female representation, so what goes behind the lines of these beautiful shoots or these beautiful shows, models' rights, women's rights, they do relate. One of the first positives I saw from Paris, so relating it to that, is finally McQueen put some like normal-sized bodies on the catwalk. This is, as a female casting director, Jess Hallett and Sarah Burton, pulling the strings there. I'm kind of amazed it has taken this long, but I'm still going to greatly applaud it for happening now. Yeah. And I think, well, thank God, there are women behind there going, this is not how I want to represent women. This is not this is slightly, you'd like to think this is an easing of what could be viewed as a very narrow portrayal of women on the catwalks, because it still is. And if we relate this directly with something like Cameron Russell's Instagram right now, where you know, she's outing the abuses that models have, in their own words, that have suffered.
Yeah.
I think that this is correlating. This is women speaking out, just going, do you know what? Not in my name.
Yeah.
It's got to change.
Yeah.
And this was the first thing that I saw that really I felt was a massive change, especially in Paris.
And I believe McQueen didn't make an announcement, did they, about it? It just sort of happened and people asked some questions.
It was very kind of, I was going to say, like, if you scroll through that show, it looked very kind of just sort of seamless, almost like it wasn't a forced bit of casting. It was a very natural kind of way of showing body diversity, whereas, you know, sometimes in the past when you've seen it, it almost feels very forced.
Token,
like, you know, like a kind of shock bit of casting. And but what I think is really interesting is that, you know, that our expectations are almost so low for, you know, fashion houses to really kind of own that responsibility of, and maybe we can discuss whether they have that responsibility to show, you know, portray that kind of diversity, whether it's in body shape, race, or, you know, or gender, or, you know, those kind of parameters, whether they have that responsibility, because every time, you know, something like this occurs during Fashion Week, it always is like a sort of separate news piece. Or, you know, like, for instance, I'm trying to think.
They did?
I'm trying to think. For instance, Miu Miu, for instance, had, I think, half of their casting this season were black women.
Yeah.
And that created like a kind of news story in itself. You know, I'm just sort of wondering when we can kind of get to the point where it doesn't become
a story anymore.
Do you think the casting of McQueen was done for the headlines? Or?
No, it absolutely wasn't, but it is interpreted that way because it's still not the norm. It's still an exception rather than
I guess you raise an interesting point about
regular occurrence.
About whether fashion should do that, whether this is the right platform or forum to kind of raise some of those questions. Because if we are taking fashion to be a sort of embodied art form, artists are very rarely kind of made to, well, actually, maybe that's not true, because in a kind of Instagram age, you get direct feedback, you get direct comments about the work that you're putting out there. So if you're upsetting someone, you find out about it pretty quickly. Whereas I think we have, fairly or unfairly, which we can work out now, kind of placed fashion under this microscope, and we're trying to get it to solve a lot of problems. And I don't know whether it's the right platform to do it. What do you think?
I wondered about this thing, this old kind of idea about fashion that one wears it because you want to be an object of desire, and whether that's sort of really disappearing because that's not particularly interesting, and whether it's, you know, it's a language, it's a form of communication, and other people understand your references, or it's a sort of different way of speaking that maybe can detach itself slightly from this idea of, you know, being an object of somebody else's gaze.
As a language, do you feel like it's a language that we now all speak? So therefore, fashion has less of a purpose in some ways. We kind of all get it now, don't we?
I don't know, because when I do a lot of research with consumers, and they say different things every day. So one day they will dress because they want to look attractive. The next day they'll dress because they want to belong, because it's the first time, I don't know, they've been on a panel or something like that, and so they want to feel comfortable. So I think it's all of those different things.
And are there any designers in particular that came out of Paris that you guys think have done that really well? This idea of dressing to communicate a personality, rather than just clothes for utilitarian purposes. Are there any designers that you guys felt did that really well?
Well, I thought there were two things that for me really were really significant. Of course, Comme des Garçons is just this really joyous transgender, trans-age, transnational kind of party. There's something really wonderful about the best of fashion as a celebration of a kind of hyper-social, intense and shared and communal culture of sort of beauty and dance and flirtation, and it was lovely. So I thought that as the kind of ideal state of what fashion might be as a kind of shared culture was fabulous. I thought the really interesting sort of political, using fashion as a form of rhetoric and making a really bold and I thought quite adventurous statement, was the is it Maria Grazia, stylist for
Creative director at
the
Dior.
creative director for Dior this year. So the way in which she gave out the Linda Nochlin essay about why have there been no great women artists, and then her references to Niki Saint-Phal, who had been a very famous model as well as an artist and had been in Vogue, and whose own life was so kind of tortured by wanting to please and wanting to be an artist and wanting to make statements about women and women's bodies and love and need. So I thought the way in which she didn't sort of abuse fashion as a public, but she enabled fashion's kind of public rhetoric to convey a set of debates and questions that I thought were really urgent and necessary and integral to fashion itself.
Or the flip side of that, my sort of feeling is, or have you bought the T-shirt?
Yes.
You know, you can either go really deep on it and go, oh, well, I've got the feminist.
Well, I guess what's interesting about it is there's this kind of cultural snobbery, isn't there? There's this sense of you should know that this is the title of an essay. You should know, not should, or, you know, do you know? And a lot of people online didn't know. You know, they were questioning, saying, what about Virginia Woolf? What about all of these people? What is she going on about? And I think that's where fashion gets very interesting, where it sort of, I guess, reminds people that it is culturally rich and culturally relevant when it's at its best. But I completely agree with your point about this almost quite throwaway, let's just shop for intellect, let's just shop for something that makes me sound and look and pretend to be more intelligent than I am. There's a different kind of intelligence that I think people are using now to, I guess, leverage themselves rather than just dressing in a way. Because we used to, you know, you used to the kind of, you know, Yohji Yamamoto, the intellectual designers, you know, how fashion lecturers dress. That was, and maybe still is in some ways, the look of an intellectual. You know,
link that back to Com as well. I believe there was Dutch masters paintings that were inside the clothes, and I thought it interesting relating to Louis Vuitton with the bags that they've just brought out, the kind of Monet, which kind of, to me, I've not seen them in real life, but you know, they kind of look like something you'd see on Canal Street. There's a kind of real irony or cheapness to them, and they're clearly not. But there is a kind of like a consuming of art references and sort of spewing them back out again. And is that kind of related to collectability of clothes? Like Com is now, you know, collected like art, and are people referencing art to push up their worth, to push up their intellectual worth and their collectability? But it's amazing that we're piggybacking art to do that.
Yeah, in the Undercover show, that I thought that was happening a bit as well, and it was slightly embarrassing, the Cindy Sherman thing. I thought just sort of put it on rather than embody it more in a more kind of, I don't know.
But the clothes that Undercover I thought were incredibly clever. You know, the fact that they in the pairs, and I didn't notice until kind of halfway through the show, where they're completely reversible.
Yeah.
So like one is like the mirror image of the other, and actually, I don't know, that kind of instance of, let's say, piggybacking of art, you know, it's as Jun Takahashi normally does, is, you know, questioning that, you know, that kind of facade of art, and that, I think that married well with the clothing.
Were you there? Because in the pictures, because he'd given himself this kind of problem of reversible clothes, some of the clothes looked really like
they were a bit cumbersome because so they were because the linings of it was the other, let's say, the other outfit. So if there was like embellishment on one, it would be on the inside of
lumpy and
I don't know how that is actually going to work in production when it goes into the stores. But I thought the show itself was really interesting in that kind of, you know, that presenting that mirror image and also kind of presenting, you know, craft in a different way.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, they're quite, it's quite a difficult feat in itself.
Yeah, exactly.
How important do you all think it is for all of those messages, those cultural messages, to be obvious to the people looking at those clothes, and in particular the people who are at the show, not necessarily people who are buying it, but how important is it for us to kind of know that it's this and it's that and it's this?
I
I think when you look at Off-White as an example, their reference being Princess Diana, which, you know, if you didn't know that, you would never guess that through the show. You wouldn't go, wow, this is so Princess Diana. It's amazing. So I kind of think, you know, we as people in the fashion industry love to get off on a reference, and all of that. Yes, but at the end of the day, if you were somebody who didn't work in fashion, you would just go, yeah, that looked nice on me. Would you care, the reference Princess Diana or anything like that? You're like, can I afford it? Where am I going to wear it?
But I suppose that's the kind of conundrum about fashion being both merchandise and clothing and something that we have to wear. It's functional, it's utilitarian, it's clothing. And also, it is also art. I mean, it has claims to modernity, so it's always something new. And in order to be new, it has to reference the old, because there's nothing new without a kind of tradition to which it innovates in. So fashion aspires to being part of a modernist art practice, as it should. I think fashion is absolutely on a par with, you know, music, opera, painting, sculpture, literature. It's absolutely one of the arts, and yet people think of it as less than, because they say, oh, well, it's commerce, it's trade, it's to do with, you know, women wanting to be attractive or pleasing, it's to do with a certain kind of, you know, weak culture.
Do we have to differentiate high street fashion from what you're talking about?
I think Paris would like to, because I think Paris, in my estimation, is obsessed with this idea of an appellation contrôlée, that it does the haute couture, it's haute, and everything else is kind of street fashion. Or England does the high street because it has youth and, you know, insubordination. But Paris, has this kind of cachet of only doing glamour and elegance and excellence and, you know, clothes that are for the haute. And I think that that's something that needs to be addressed and discussed, because it is about a kind of, you know, kind of cultural triage that I find a bit distasteful, really, and why I think the Paris shows still have this status as being, you know, the most important world shows, or one of the most important world shows. And yet, to me, that's not where fashion comes from. It comes from actually a lot of young people doing things intuitively and for one another and on the street and for clubs and in the bedrooms. And then it filters up. And eventually the designers get it. And Paris usually gets it sort of 10 years after it's been happening, you know, in Camden or elsewhere.
Carl seems a lot quicker than that at Chanel. His sort of cultural upcycling, he very much says he looks at the street, which is a sort of, however, the Chanel show, I don't think was about that at all.
I don't know what streets he's looking at, though. I think, you know,
apparently the south of France. This is what everybody looks like in Monaco.
As well. Well, we can look at Jacquemus next in terms of the south of France off. But Chanel is an interesting one, because I guess that it is the spectacle, it is, and comes with this history, so we almost forgive it for lots and lots and lots and lots of things. You know,
do we? I didn't. Not this season. This is the show that made me the most angry out of the whole month. And thankfully, Susie's kind of like cooled my spitting chips about it, because I was like,
yeah, I need to verify that information, but
okay, well, we can sort of, you know, we can just put it out there as hearsay. So when I saw this show just from an outsider, somebody in the fashion industry, I was just like, I've been struggling in the last 5 years, even standing up to being the second most polluting industry in the world. You know, that has affected my career. I've had to back away from fashion because I can't stand by that. And so you see something like this, taking nature, rebuilding it, and even going to the shows that I went to, luxury, reams and reams of luxury carpet that all go in the bin after the show. And then, you know, and you see this and I look at it and I'm just like, you are joking. You are recreating nature to then put it in the bin. You're going to trash this all. Now, Susie sort of was like, calm down. This is, you know, this is...
They have set the aspects of the set, primarily the water. I'm not sure about that.
It's recyclable.
Fake. It's rock. It's recyclable. The plastic used in the collection, I may have to get a double verification about that, is made from some sort of reusable, recyclable, like a kind of recycled bottle plastic.
Carl won't give any references or talk about it, which
it was not mentioned in the reviews, but that is the information that I've heard.
Karinna, what did you think about Chanel?
I kind of looked at this one from, I had a quick kind of analysis of which shows were the kind of most Instagrammed, and just to kind of go back as well. The most Instagram posts weren't things that happened on the catwalk, there were things that were happening on the streets, which I think was quite interesting, back to the point we just mentioned about kind of where is it most important, or where is it most hot. And the one that came higher than Chanel was Yves Saint Laurent. And I think they were very clever about doing theirs under the Eiffel Tower. It was kind of clever.
Do you think because they inhaled the hashtags of General of the Tour Eiffel? So actually it wasn't really about the show, it was just every single tourist for the last year or something.
But I've got to say about Saint Laurent, I've been trying to sort of decipher, you know, if you took away the set, would the clothes stand up? I think yes, because it was a very, you know, it was a very kind of strangely emotive show, even in that big, gigantic setting under the, you know, the lights.
I mean,
you know, it was, you know, we had that quote left on our seats about Pierre Berger and Saint Laurent being two crazy fools in love, and the collection was, I think, you know, tapped into this kind of sensuality around the house of Saint Laurent that, you know, sometimes is a little bit forgotten in that kind of, when we bring out that narrative about Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger. So yeah, for me, I think it was a strong show by itself without the Tour
What
Eiffel.
do these clothes say about women, and how Anti-Vaccarello?
Should we go to the? Can we go to the last one? So we're looking at the kind of like, you know, sort of day wear.
The last looks, yeah. But,
The couture looks.
Yeah, but the
scanning
last
down.
looks, you know, I think are the most appropriate to talk about when you're saying what do these say about women, or
I think they are quite sexual.
Yeah.
I mean, and
For sure, but isn't the, you know, the overall gist of what we've been hearing about Me Too and Weinstein is that, and what the Paris shows express across the gamut of shows, is that, you know, there's that freedom to dress how you want, in whatever way you want, showing as much flesh as you want without inviting that kind of abuse. I mean,
who was it? There was an actress that came out today,
shouldn't that be the general consensus anyway?
Blanchett saying, you know, all women want to look sexy. It doesn't mean I want to fuck you.
yeah.
From a psychoanalysis point of view, and this idea, you know, what is it? Lacan, the drape, not the drape, the gap, the gate.
Oh yes, this is your thing more than mine. The gape.
Well, it was like, yeah, Lacan, you know, the great Parisian psychoanalyst, it says that, you know, where the sex is, where the allure is in the garment, is where the garment gapes. So it's like this reference to the hidden and the reveal, the sort of the peekaboo of kind of revealing and hiding the body. And I was saying, well, that's very well for Parisian haute couture, but what I think is really exciting at the moment in terms of London fashion is all of the ripped knee jeans and all of these bare jeans, and it's not the bare flesh that's in any way alluring. It's not intended to be sexy. What's sexy is the kind of communication of getting it like a joke that's kind of going viral, that's spreading. And it's this kind of sense of playing the game of fashion, getting the references and joining or not joining, but just enjoying the fact that it is happening. So I think that's a really interesting use of the naked body that's not about revealing, hiding, or trying to seduce, but that's actually a kind of insubordinate, well, there it is. It's a missing bit of the garment, and that's what the game is. And that's something that, I mean, I've seen that Hilfiger's got his own ripped jeans, and yes, it's becoming a marketable commodity now, but that's not where it started. And I think that that's the interesting thing, is that it's not where it's... I mean, Paris, yes, Paris, let's not do down Paris. You know, a friend of mine, Philip Mann, just wrote a book called The Dandy at Dusk, and he said it took the British to invent the dandy, but it took Paris to explain to them why they'd done it, or what it meant. So I think there is this, you know, the strength of Paris as being, they've got the name for everything, they've got the appellation, they've got, you know, they say what things, they name things and they authorize things, and they, but it takes the British in a sense to dare to go beyond beauty and into something that's much more dangerous and sublime, and they dare to be ugly, whereas the French are, in a sense, they're just constrained to be elegant and beautiful all the time.
Do you think we're more afraid of beauty and sex?
Possibly. I mean, I think there is a courage to things being really beautiful. Some of the really beautiful fashion in the Paris collections, I thought, was brave because of its beauty, its fragility.
Okay.
If we think about Paris now, it's really, you know, a much more diverse set of voices than, let's say, French couturiers. You know, it's been encompassing of a lot of new voices, and I think, you know, we were going to talk about Jacques Mus, who is a French designer, who is presenting a very different. Although I want to say this collection is maybe like a bit of a turn for him. You know, he has been known for presenting a very different, almost like an alternative version of how a French woman dresses. So French style, French attire, all of those kind of cliches, he's kind of flipped. This one was very sensual, but, you know, again, kind of he took it from a very personal perspective, you know, looking at his mother, wandering on a beach in the south of France. But there was still a sort of slightly off-kilter kind of oddness to that sensuality. You know, the heels were a funny shape. Some of the bags were almost, you know, kind of slightly humorous in their sizing.
Everything sort of shrunk by 10%.
Yeah, everything sort of deliberately, yeah, you know, the play with proportions is interesting. So, you know, I don't know. I think Paris in recent seasons has become a lot more kind of diverse and a lot more sort of energetic in its, you know, it's still the capital and it's still the authority, it's still got the big houses, but there are also a lot of young designers now showing in Paris and opting to show in Paris. Yeah. Because, you know, they feel that they can have that platform now alongside the big houses.
Yeah. Anouchka, what did you want to say?
Just something, I don't even know what it means, but the shows that I've found the most exciting to look at just on a gut level were the ones where explicitly they said the most stupid things about women. So the Tom Brown show and the Margiela show, Galliano, both of them was completely idiotic, like the Tom Brown, the lumpy bumpy girls who then transport, like what is that? The Galliano thing, the woman who's got so much leisure and so much money that she can't hold herself together or whatever, just these dumb, insulting narratives. But the clothes, I thought viscerally, it was so exciting. They were, you know, technically so beautiful, so inventive, just completely amazing.
Were people offended by this? Because I didn't see much. Did you see anything online? How do people feel about this stuff? Because it's...
They just like the unicorn. Everyone too.
The most
Everyone likes the biggest takeaway.
Instagrammable unicorn, okay.
So Anouchka, do you think that was parody? Do you think they were using it ironically, humorously, this idea of the woman who's falling apart? Or I mean, I think there's a lot of humour in fashion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Galliano, he knows about falling apart, so he's not being silly.
So then, like, it comes into question, seeing as, you know, you made those observations, actually, I didn't hear anybody talk about the kind of ridiculousness of a woman walking laden with baggages and first, you know, luggage tags and things. Or Tom Brown, you know, making lumpy bumpy women. It's so, you know, it kind of, we talked about whether then people care about these kind of slightly off-putting images of women. Because the visual effect is so arresting.
Yeah, exactly. The Tom Brown one, just the technical innovation, and it's amazing.
Margiela's always worked with irony and humour, hasn't he, and parody. I mean, virtually to the point of surrealism in his early shows.
Exactly. And the thing with Galliano taking over is such a sort of odd thing, but it's almost like he's having an argument with Margiela or something. I mean, it's such a misfit that the thing that comes out is really dialectical. It's like, you know, and the way a lot of the clothes are all the finish with the guts ripped out, whereas with Margiela things often it's unfinished. It's like a sort of inversion of the logic of the brand. It's
I think maybe the shows could be, in a sense, they're like opera. They're so removed from what gets sold and where the money comes from. So it's not about commodity production. The shows are on another level of avant-garde kind of spectacle, really. And so it's almost like a dream or a nightmare. It has this other status completely. And they can take real risks and do things that aren't about selling or manufacture or commodity production.
I think that's where Dior gets a lot of criticism, because it's very commercial, it's super easy to understand and wear, and it's very, I mean, it is what it is. So it doesn't really, in most cases, warrant much discussion, which is unfair. But at the same time, it's very fascinating that the sales are doing super well, but actually critically, everyone's panning it, everyone hates it. And that just exposes this kind of very strange world of fashion criticism, fashion writing, fashion media, and the people with the credit cards, people buying, wearing, and enjoying this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think this idea that fashion has become more democratic because things are exposed to people, just because there's an Instagram campaign behind the scenes of a run-up to Claire Wright Keller's debut at Givenchy with these gorgeous cats, because that's happening, you know, that's somehow inviting us all in, but it's bollocks, because they're not. And that's why, just to build on, because I've just been in Seoul for Seoul Fashion Week, where actually a lot of the audience is made up of people who've gone through a ballot and won and been given tickets to the show. And what that does is it creates this, and Kuho Jung, who is the executive director of Seoul Fashion Week, actually said, you know, Fashion Week, fashion is a big party, and I wanted to invite more people. And because the fashion industry in Seoul is relatively new, it's about 3 decades old, there's this real sense of energy. So you actually have young people loving and enjoying and constant flashing of cameras going on. And there's a very different energy to, I think, the fashion and not just in Paris, but the performance around fashion, because everyone in fashion is also performing as much as the designers are performing themselves. So from a social media point of view, are we still just looking for that Instagrammable moment in a very sort of, makes me feel dead inside, but it's true.
It depends who you are. The marketing managers of brands certainly will be to a certain extent, but it's all very dependent on like the personality of each brand, and if the brand is quite discreet, and if they want to be discovered, and if they want to, for example, we were talking earlier about giving show notes or not giving show notes, or having your show in a kind of out of the way location versus having it in a more obvious location, or the complexity of what you actually put on the runway. It's so different per brand. What I kind of think is evident from a consumer's aspect is consumers want a way to help to navigate through that process.
Yeah.
So they want writers to show them different ways that they can interpret the information, but perhaps ultimately make their mind up themselves. But it's hard.
It's hard
even for us at that.
Even experiencing a 2D image of a fashion show gives you absolutely no concept of what it's like when you're there. The theatre, the emotion. Susie's take on the Saint Laurent show was completely the polar opposite of my take from it, because, you know, I was just looking.
Well, that's why I was trying to decipher whether it was the Twinkling Lights of Tour.
Yeah.
Or Tower,
because, you know,
going to my head.
I just find it so brash and kind of obvious. In distinct comparison, and thank goodness there is, you know, a tapestry of different designers in Paris now, like Jack Amos. You know, you look at the last dresses, and I just kind of go, right, well, that's somebody's vision of what perhaps I should look like. You know, I
kind of love Saint Laurent for its crudeness, for its kind of super
gauche kind of,
just
brash.
lap it up, you know, in a way that. And can we look at Balmain for a second? Because I think that's the weird brand that's actually now starting to look super dated for me. And some of those shapes and some of those things. So it's almost it's a very tricky, because I guess when you found, or if you kind of identify yourself as a brand that is really, let's just say millennial, or you're kind of feeding on, your fans are feeding what you're doing and how you're designing and how you're making clothes, but ultimately not buying them, it creates this disconnect between lots and lots of different things. What did you all think of this, or what do you all think of it looking at it now?
There is a bit of a chasm, I would say, between the kind of messaging of this very young creative director who is like, I'm all about the fans, I'm all about the people, you know, I've come from a really humble upbringing, etc., etc. With the clothes, which are like super high octane, you know, and they're very, very, very expensive. And, you know, they're all, I mean, I think one of the last girls that was walking in the show, like she could barely walk because she was wearing like a dress that was really, really tight around, you know, it was like a sort of fishtail hem dress. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's like one where, you know, they've definitely done a really great job of leveraging the creative director's image and, you know, his friendship groups into kind of like a social media success. but whether that marries up with the clothes, I'm not so sure.
I still find it interesting, men designing for women. You know, now I have a child, and I sort of gravitate towards Stella McCartney, who has kids and stuff like that. And you go, yeah, I can look great, and you know, and it sort of fits in all sorts of boxes. And I still see shows like that, and I'm like, you know, there was a show in New York, and they had a pregnant woman. I can't remember the label, and they had, and her tummy was just coming out of, and I was just like, you know, and there was a pregnant woman on the catwalk, and I know that's become more of a thing, but I still look at this and I go, well, that's not me. That can never be me. And so, but it also doesn't create that thing in me anymore where I'm like, I should aspire to this. I'm just going, it's just out of touch.
Is this a young person's game, then? Is all of this just for that aspirational 18?
We could all wear clothes.
Looking up at stuff.
You know, or we could all buy into their brand. You know, I could still be going, well, I'm not going to wear the clothes, but I'd buy the bag or whatever. You know, it just doesn't speak to me at all.
Yeah. Because there is this obsession with youth, which has always existed within fashion. Obviously, it's coming through with the casting, and in recent years, that's more explicit as a kind of, I guess, comment on how everyone wants us to look, which is incredibly kind of prepubescent, if you like, and Lolita, and we can go all into all of that stuff. But from your point of view as a psychoanalyst, what do you think some of these messages are doing to us? And how should we prepare ourselves to...
I mean, I suppose it depends on the individual how persecutory the messages are, and for some people they're totally persecutory, and other people are better at batting them off.
Yeah.
I mean, they're always very complex. Like with the Balmain thing, it's a total kind of inversion of the idea that with the class idea that poor people are meant to copy the aristocrats or something, and that's out the window. But also, I loved the recent kind of top shopification of Issey Miyake, just because that's such a kind of posh granny brand, and then suddenly all the teenagers in South London are wearing it. Yeah, exactly. It's good. Yeah, I mean, it can go in any direction, I think.
Yeah.
I think the youthfulness thing is really complex, actually. I think young people are beautiful. They just are, you know, whether they want to be or not, really. They just are, and it's kind of devastating. And when your kids become 18, you know, they are just wonderful, they're beautiful. And it's right to celebrate that, because it's about celebrating something that's not about power, that's about a certain kind of precariousness or instability or certain kind of, you know,
ephemeral.
not even know. Yes, it's ephemeral, it's a kind of transience. But fashion, because it's a modernist art, is all about the new and innovation and neophilia and the worshipping of the newness for its own sake. And that is intrinsically about newness and youngness. I don't mean necessarily about youthful bodies, although youthful bodies are part of the culture of it. But it doesn't mean that fashion is only ever explained by or worn by or advanced by youth. I think that there is a real significance in terms of the way in which fashion respects the ancient and the old and keeps recycling the old. So every time, you know, there are polka dots, people will reference Kawakubo, but they'll also reference the 1920s, and you know, so it'll keep going back in terms of history and knowing the present, what's now and what was then and what is going to be the future, and linking those three sort of time zones up makes stories, it makes narratives, and it makes futures for people. And I think that's really complex. I'm a bit sort of dismayed by all these stories of, you know, well, these young models, we're predating them and this is not good for young girls. I think that the role of youthfulness or young or neophilia in fashion is infinitely complex and rich, and I think it needs to be respected as art, really. And that includes the kind of the nakedness of the body as well.
Why do you think we're not respecting it now? Do you think there's a change in conversation because of the exposure that fashion has now? That more people are commenting on it, more people are looking at it, more people are asking questions about it.
People are more, you know, calling it out, you know, that power has like descended upon, you know, the general public at large. So like, you know, brands, everyone is suddenly kind of much more liable and much more exposed to criticism, and they're much more likely to respond, whether that response comes from a genuine place of, you know, a genuine good intention, or whether it's just about damage control. You know, that is sort of like sometimes, you know, my problem with this kind of, let's say, this more woke sensibility within fashion. You know, is it genuine? You know, can it be trusted? You know, that's that would be my kind of question about the way fashion and the onus upon it to act responsible and to adhere to, let's say, I don't know, a kind of global set of ethics.
Who are the designers that we do trust, in particular the ones working in Paris?
Sandra Rhodes, obviously.
I mean,
Sandra never lets us down.
we talked about Com, but we always hold Com in a higher plane for reason being that they're able to put out a show, consisting of only 16 silhouettes, the most exploded, unwieldy, kind of flamboyant expression, in fashion there is. But then they're also able to sell like perfumes and T-shirts and, off the back of that. And for me, Com is always kind of almost like the final frontier. It's like, what can you do that would like deter, let's say, your average woman from going, oh my God, I would never wear that because I'm scared of how I'm going to be seen or how I'm going to be perceived. Yeah. But that is like the final kind of frontier. Like if you're able to or dare to pull that off, then you're sort of immune to the criticisms that we talk about, with women's clothing and how people see you and how people perceive you.
But I think also within this industry there is this kind of fascination with designers that confuse us. And I think we automatically, with Com and Rei Kawakubo's work in particular, and Miuccia Prada and a couple of those designers, we just take whatever they give us. And we actually enjoy not understanding what's going on. And I think that's where some of the problems happen, because it's, we need to understand what this is saying. I think fashion people in particular, that's a generalization, but when you're looking at the shows, I think people just quite enjoy that sense of, what is this? I don't get it. I want to learn something. I want to know what it is. And even at a very base level with the Dior essay, this kind of, here's this text that you may or may not have read. That talks a lot about, I guess, Italian and French education as well, because you would have read it in school. In the UK, you don't.
Do you think that filters down then to the general public? Because then I think at that point, then it comes down to sort of more like visceral aesthetic likes or dislikes. Do I like it? Would I wear it?
Yeah. Also, I guess the
part with my money.
The function of fashion, is it to get laid? Is it to invite people in to look at me? Is it the opposite? Is it to push people away?
I think in a way now it's become more than that. I think it's become a manipulation to also send people, to falsify or verify messages about yourself. So you can, fake it till you make it. Or, you can, there was a truth in it, or there's an expression. It's the same thing as you can't be what you can't see. So the role of somebody like Com or Stella McCartney, or, is to be like, there is other. There isn't just sex sells. There isn't just black Anthony Vaccarello, or, it's like, you can be that woman. You can also be this woman or that one or that woman. And I think that's important as well.
I wondered as well about the Vivienne Westwood show, or the Andreas Krontaler thing, just because he's sort of so like, it's all about sex, but the clothes are quite like, woo. And then she's saying, don't buy clothes. And then there's this weird...
Let's not go there.
Those messages are very weird. Yeah. And I don't know how...
how do you marry those
Don't buy more stuff.
Up?
Yeah.
My new collection.
Yeah. It's funny, there's a skirt in this collection. Well, it's a cape now, but it's been in every collection lately, and it's exactly the same, and now it's moved up, the same shape, but onto the shoulders.
Wasted.
I think part of all of that is handing over the intelligence or the decision making to the consumer, whereas previously it would have been the media, or it would have been the brands who would have dictated, this is what I mean, this is what you should buy.
And filtered the information, there's no filter anymore.
Yeah, and now that's kind of passed over to the consumers to make their decisions themselves, which some consumers want to do and other consumers don't.
But I think it is lovely the way that fashion does celebrate consumer choosiness. Because there's such an infinite variety. It's like looking at some weird wildlife kind of, biodiversity show of how many kinds of insects can you get in one kind of ecosphere. And so I think there is something about a celebration of, I mean, there's far more things than you could ever even begin to choose between, isn't there? And yet that recognition that there is something that is significant about our desire to discriminate between one kind of handbag and another, or one kind of trainer and another, or one shade of sorbet raspberry and another shade of exact kind of pink. And I think that in itself is really significant about shows, about the Paris shows, and fashion in particular. And I think that's a celebration of a certain kind of femininity that I think is really meaningful. And I don't know what it says about women's real ability to have agency or choice or power, or I don't know what it says about it really, except that I think that it has value in its own right, really.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about the kind of roundup of Paris was that the colour red was particularly predominant, and I don't know, you two might be able to suggest more than me whether that has a deeper meaning than...
More than pink?
More than millennial pink.
There's a lot of red there already. 3 flashes.
I was thinking the other gender thing that was coming to mind when you were talking about the Weinstein thing was that it's really interesting to my mind that we all know that this has been going on for decades, that men have been predating young actresses, and young actresses have been trying to please the casting couch has been known about, you know, since 1900 in Hollywood. You know, it's been the standing joke. So the fact that shock horror has come to light now in 2017 seems to me to be more of a narrative than a thing. You know, it's actually, this kind of story has emerged at exactly the same time as young women like Lena Dunham can make their own films, star in their own films. You know, they can run television series called Girls that's about women having sex or being both genders.
Then what's fascinating is that once fashion gets involved, it photoshops, Lena Dunham in particular, photoshops them, it stretches them, it changes them. So there is this real disconnect with us all celebrating all these hashtags about how wonderful and fantastic women are, which they are. But then when fashion gets involved, it sort of reminds all of us that you're not quite as good as you could be.
But also the point I was going to make earlier about expanding on that is these catwalk images are then shot by Terry Richardson and those kind of, they are not separate. We consume these products with which they pay these people with. So we're kind of complicit in a way by the enjoyment of the images or buying the products or whatever. So, you know, and this Harvey Weinstein thing coming out and Maria, impossible to pronounce surname, somebody help me, at Dior. You know, I'd love to think that's totally not tokenism, and I don't think it is. I think the first female designer at Dior is a sign that things are changing.
I think it's high time, and I think that she knows her kind of her heritage and where and the people that were her antecedents, and she celebrates them, and that's really significant. I think there should be. I mean, that's part of a kind of a new feminist ethos, really. But I think it's interesting that the first signs of politics in fashion were to do with anxieties around sustainability, around the ecosphere, around you know, the new slavery bill and the, you know, the ethics of the sourcing of materials and of work. And that's fair enough, but I don't think that that is the sum total of the possibilities of fashion to explore different kinds of contradictions and different kinds, the way in which fashion can use its power and the way in which fashion can link up to all sorts of other disciplines. I think that's just the beginning, and I think that it's sort of this idea that, you know, politics will be the downer that's going to try and stop people having fun or stop designers being creative. No, I think that was just one starting point, and I think the whole issue of what might be politics and fashion is actually just beginning to open up, and it's such an interesting time, I think, for fashion now.
What percentage of the population do we think actually talk about fashion like this, like taking it apart, rather than just going, you know, I've got to buy a pink coat this season, that kind of thing, you know. And
I think the problem with anything, but I think the problem with anything like that is if everyone did do it, then it'd be really dreary. We wouldn't be able to enjoy this stuff. But I know from teaching that I do it every single day with my students, because I feel like if they want to have a voice in this industry, they need to understand what they're doing. They need to understand why something is the way that it is. But I don't think everyone should, because it actually kind of just strips away everything that fashion is built on. It's the fantasy, all that fun. It kind of gets rid of it. And that's, I think, that worthiness that has happened and popped up in the food industry, for example, that worthiness around lots of other areas that we're all meant to be better people and we're all meant to do X, Y, and Z, that's starting to come into fashion as well. And I think that's where there's this confusion. Where
Well, I
you have
pitched a
Vivienne
show
Westwood-
called Fashion Unzipped or Fashion Unstitched, and there was absolutely no pickup on it at all because fashion is a niche market. Apart from the fact that we all, and the younger generations are buying pieces once, twice, 3, 4, whatever, every week, and then throwing them away.
Yeah.
I think that there is a kind of, there needs to be a sort of a more of a conversation about it because I think most people don't actually know how their clothes are produced from the high end to the low end. They
A
just
lot of people a lot of my students who had watched The True Cost and all of these horrific documentaries, then I asked them, well, where's all this from? It's Primark, it's Topshop, and they're still doing it. And what's interesting is that it's a very short-term kind of effect on them. So it's kind of like, oh, I felt really bad for a couple of weeks, but then I had to go on Boohoo and buy a dress. So there's this real, because it doesn't feel real. It's over there.
That's also because of the economic trade-off that they have.
Yeah.
I think it's not that necessarily, they still might want to support that cause, but they have different sorts of trade-offs in their buying process.
But can you still support that cause whilst contributing to it in such a kind of direct way?
There's starting to be a few more options, but definitely it's still slim pickings. You have to search harder to find options that you're not paying more for sustainable working practices or such like.
I also think...
Do you think, Dal, that perhaps the discussions aren't being had because people still think of fashion as ultimately trivial and not worth studying? So, for instance, in France, there's been an A-level in philosophy forever. So philosophy is headline news in Paris.
Yeah.
And there's no A-level in fashion in the UK. There's A-level textiles.
Yeah.
Well, they call it soft technologies. But, fashion is an infinitely complex, rich area of culture.
Well, in another way, they've got rid of art history as well in schools. So very quickly, you won't have art, and art historians are actually better to talk about fashion than anyone else.
When fashion starts ruining the planet, I think we're going to start talking about it a lot more, but perhaps in a not an intellectual way, but in a very serious, what have we done? China is already having to go look at their production and going, because people are choking in cities, the yellow smoke and all of this sort of stuff, not smoke, but the fog. It's like, this is happening. Really,
the steel industry, pharmaceuticals, motor industry. I mean, it's
fashion is the second most polluting industry in the world because nobody is saying you can't do this. Everyone's going, I'm going to buy more.
And do you think Instagram has this terrible thing, this idea of re-wearing, which that word didn't exist until quite recently, but if you have a record of what you've worn, then people know you've worn it, and wearing something twice.
Well, the rise, it's come directly with that, because of course, if you've worn something once and it's documented, then
you've done
very
it.
quickly to see it.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, that term, kind of re-wearing, is like, well, isn't that just normal? That's just like wearing stuff. That's like wearing something more than once.
Yeah.
But I do think our attitudes to clothing are really problematic in terms of just throwing things away and just leaving them. But ultimately, there's also fun to be had in dressing up and changing. But another thing I want to pick up that one of you mentioned about this idea of the pressure, the options that are available are infinite. Of course, the Paris fashion shows, if we had time to look at all of them, every single one of them will tell us something different about what to buy.
Don't you think, because if you look out on the street, people's looks are much more homogenized? Like the pink coat, as I brought it up, that's gone on for a couple of seasons, and it's kind of like, well, because there is a narrower bracket of style bloggers and a much less choice. Every shop has got the same thing in it because of the pressures to sell it. So we see this, and this is the theatre, but actually out there, people's looks are getting much more kind of normal, everyone looks kind of the same.
The Apprentice, trench coat, central, every single woman on The Apprentice has the same coat, isn't it?
I am a businesswoman, so I wear business.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, with that homogenization, I guess we're animals, aren't we? We all just like looking like other people. There's a real comfort in actually looking at someone and going, yeah, I get you. We kind of know each other. We know everything about each other based on your shoe or whatever it is. And that, I think, is slowly...
I understand you based on the messages you're...
Get it, from your smell, from the way you're holding your bag. I feel like we could understand each other. I mean, I always do that when I go into a lift. I always look around and go, well, if we get stuck, which one am I going to talk to? And you do that based on looking at well, we all look at different things, but I think that's a very animal thing to do. But I think this pressure of having all these new things exposed to us maybe makes it harder for younger people. I'm talking sort of 5, 6, 7-year-olds who are being exposed to loads of things to start identifying what it is they're into and actually owning a style, owning a fashion sensibility. I think it's almost quite schizophrenic now, the way that we shop, the way that we're buying things. And I guess the Paris show is a very good kind of example of actually if you can get everything. Everything is out there for you. Are there any other last shows you'd like to talk about before we wrap up?
We haven't talked about Vuitton, which is one of my personal highlights.
How are we doing for time?
I think we're nearly at end of time.
We're over. Let's talk about Louis Vuitton last.
It was
Yeah.
I didn't like it.
Oh, really? Okay. So it was one of the last shows. Maybe it was because it felt like a sort of final word on Paris. But
And you wanted to go home.
yeah, I was running for the Eurostar afterwards. You know, I really thought this was sort of Nicolas Ghesquière at his best, you know, juxtaposing something as, you know, unexpected as like an 18th century frock coat with running shorts and these chunky trainers. You know, I thought it was a really kind of freeing expression of, you know, probably his most sort of freeing expression that he's done at Vuitton since he has been at the house. And, you know, I thought about, you know, this thing where there is this kind of, you know, difference between what we see on the streets being this homogenized thing, you know, so far removed from this, you know, if high fashion operates, you know, and if they are competing with, you know, a high street that is so prolific and just so, you know, like their ability to churn out new things all the time, you know,
Go the other way.
then let's go the other way and do something that, you know, can be appreciated on this higher level and can be appreciated, you know, not for its wearability, but for, you know, its artistry and its aesthetic kind of
It's a great
appeal, or like, you know, like whether you like it or not, you know, at least it's saying something.
Paris, to me, when I used to look at the shows, there would always be those moments where it was completely aspirational, where I was just like, oh, I could only dream of wearing that. And this was probably the only show where I went, that was that moment, that kind of like, oh my God, what would it feel like to put that piece on? Because
Yeah,
it's
a frock
just-
coat with a pair of
just-
nylon running shorts.
and you just feel the
Everyone's
weight
dream.
and knowing all of the handwork that's gone into it, which I feel like whilst we are wearing more lifestyle-y clothes and, you know, I demand more clothes that suit my lifestyle. If I want to look at a fashion show, I do want to be taken to this place where you just go, wow.
But why should it be under the name of Vuitton? I mean, the students have been doing this with neoprene and nylon shorts and frock coats for decades.
Yeah,
You know,
and
it's
the-
I don't
happening
think
in
it's
the
not
arts.
to that level of artistry in the kind of frock coats.
I think better. I think the students do it better. I think Paris is parasitic.
Yeah.
It uses the lifeblood that comes out of the Great British Art School and it calls it its own. It names it as its maison. And I think it's wrong. I think it's immoral and I think it's bad art.
That's why you have Instagram accounts like Diet Prada calling
at
people
Diet Prada.
out. Yeah, that's one of
But
them.
also just quickly, I think it's interesting to note that, again, from an Instagram perspective, the most Instagram shot was the Stranger Things t-shirt. It wasn't the...
We are all so dumb.
What a good place to end. Thank you very much, everybody.
We knew we'd not agree.